Surely I say to you, now notice the connection in 28. There are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming. Now after 6 days, we know that Jesus manifested himself to them in the glorious. And he showed them a glimpse of what? The kingdom. This is not, remember, the original manuscripts didn't have verses and chapters, okay? This was one piece. And this is meant by the writer to be taken, wow. Jesus is encouraging them to lose their lives so that they can gain it. What kind of gain? The gain that he will get with his angels who will not rule, but the people who will get life, meaning the fullness thereof, of ruling with him. The same thing you can look at Mark 8:35 through 9:7 and Luke 9:23 to 35. It's clearly that at the beginning of the book, Jesus is already establishing the premise for the entire book. I came, I live righteous, I inherit, I will be delivered in the future as an inherit deliverance in order to rule, and I will have who? Metakois. I will have partners. And he, leading into 2, he blazes the trail to say to us, to the Hebrew writers and to us today by default, that we can have a share in that world to come because it was not subjected to the angels. There's no way you can get that inheritance in the first part of the book. It is not setting up the rest of the book to encourage these people by putting the example of the man God as the sine qua non example of what we should follow after. Because he endured it all the way to the end. And that's why I love 12:4. You have not yet resisted to the point of bloodshed in your struggle against sin. Now view that in light of the Matthew passages we just read. And what Jesus is stating all through the book. He wants us to get the point that you Hebrew guys, the Hebrew writer, referring to Jesus, need to keep going. Because there's something beautiful at the end. He's not unique. Jesus did it. With the glorification aspect to encourage them. That was a glimpse of the kingdom that they saw. He's giving them a glimpse of the future reign. But notice how the rest of the words are used. Let's go to Hebrews 6:12. Chronomeo. Hebrews 6:12, if you will. Hebrews 6:12, the author says that ye be not slothful, but followers of them who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Hebrews 6:12, the author calls all believers to not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. This concept is fully developed in Hebrews 11. We agree with that? You get a perfect example of what living by faith, the father of faith, Abraham, a very practical example of the biblical reality of what it means to live by faith in Hebrews 11. This inheritance is based on obedience, has many plural epangelias. For example, rest, ruling, glory, blessing, joy, special fellowship, on and on and on. You can see 7:6, 8:6, 11:13, 17, and 33. Yet these promises, in the context, derive from a singular promise that you can see in verses 13 and 14, and verses 17, contextually recalls God's promise to bless Abraham in Genesis 22:17, directly related to 12:2, by multiplying his seed, which envisions a future dominion over all nations. In other words, that singular promise is, although Abraham had eternal life by just believing in the coming seed, I don't think Abraham just believed generally on God. I don't think he was just a deity. And I hear that in circles because of my beloved professor ago that God was always the object of faith. Well, I don't know if that means God by default is the object of faith, yeah. If that means consciously, I think consciously they had to believe in the coming seed. The object of faith is the same everywhere. Where do you get that from? 8:56, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. At some level, Abraham had to understand something about Jesus, because John 8:56 makes no sense. He also chastised the two disciples on the road to Emmaus for being slow of hearts, not believing what the prophets had taught. And what exactly he's referring to there in the context says, if you listen to them talk, is that he had died, well, our hopes are dashed. And he's talking about his death and resurrection that they should have known. That's what Jesus says. The singular promise that he makes here is the promise that Abraham, in light of the context of inheritance in Hebrew, had, that he then can later enjoy the plural promises because he was obedient ultimately by what? Offering his son Isaac. But it is no doubt an inheritance based on obedience. Though not stated here how these recipients in Hebrews 9:15 will obtain the eternal inheritance, it is verified elsewhere in Hebrews, as Dillow and Hodges have noted this as well as the speaker. Notice 9 and 15 where the other appearance of inheritance occurs. And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament, that by means of death, for redemption of the transgression that were under the First Testament, they which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. It's eternal because this inheritance is forever. I think Bob made a good point yesterday too. That in Hebrews, you can kind of get a glimpse that this rulership doesn't just last for the millennium. Whoa, that changes the whole ball game. That means that wherever you're going to do for eternity, folks, it's right here and now. I don't know about the accusation-free grace skits, but that is very motivating for me to live right. Because whatever you get in the fair is whatever you've done before you got to the fair that you enter for free. Those that don't get to play, ride games, enjoy the ponies, are people that didn't work and didn't suffer and didn't have the funds to pay to enjoy the benefits of the whole point of going to the fair. So it isn't just entering the fair that's the point, it's enjoying the reason why you go to the fair. That's the point, which is enjoyment of a special fellowship and inheritance in the future. I like what Dillow says, Jody says, it is by faith and patience, Hebrews 6:12 he cites, and holding firm to the end, Hebrews 3:14, that we inherit what has been promised. In other words, the writer has already assumed that you have read up to this point. One of the problems I find in Bible studies and in hermeneutics is that people read verses. And folks, these people read a book in one sitting. We didn't have chapters, we didn't have verses. They're getting it. So when you get to 10 or 9 or 8, they are following the gist. When I teach a class at a college at Moody, I had the students read Romans. And one rule I had. When you sit down and read it, make sure you read it through. Don't stop in one verse and hopscotch to another verse. So that you can get the flow. And you know what happens? You start to get the gist of the book. The gist of the book. I like what Zane says. Whereas some of you know him, Prof. Hodges or Mr. Hodges. Or I like to say doctor, although he probably has his honorary doctor in heaven now. The author was here perhaps countering the appeal of the sectarians or others to the guilt feelings of those Jewish Christians who must often have been charged with deserting their ancestral faith. But the blood of Christ ought to quiet their conscience permanently and lead them to pursue the eternal inheritance which the new covenant relationship brought them. Of course, the writer meant here, as elsewhere, that it is only through faith and patience that his readers could inherit what has been promised. 6:12 again. Hebrews 11:7 also speaks of heirship based on promises and obedience.